I was working 3 jobs, carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs while my wife sat on the couch watching TV. When I finally set the bags down, sweating and out of breath, she looked at me and said, "You're getting disgusting to look at. You better lose that weight fast, or I'll find someone who actually takes care of himself." Her friends laughed. I just smiled. 72 hours later, she was calling me nonstop, begging me. So here's the thing about rock bottom. You don't realize you've hit it until you're already there, face first in the dirt, wondering how the hell you ended up eating concrete for dinner. My name is Marcus Hall, and at 38 years old, I was basically a professional juggler, except instead of colorful balls, I was juggling 3 soul-crushing jobs just to keep our financial house of cards from collapsing like a bad poker bluff. Let me paint you a picture of my glamorous life. Monday through Friday, I'd drag my sorry ass to the warehouse at 6 a.m., where I'd spend 8 hours moving boxes that weighed more than my self-esteem. Then I'd race across town to my second gig at Murphy's Gas and Go, where I'd smile at customers who treated me like I was personally responsible for gas prices being higher than a stoner at a Grateful Dead concert. Weekends? Oh, weekends were reserved for my third act as a handyman, fixing other people's broken shit while my own life fell apart faster than a dollar store umbrella in a hurricane. This particular night, and trust me, this night is burned into my brain like a bad tattoo. I had just finished a 12-hour shift that felt longer than a Marvel movie. My supervisor, a guy who probably peaked in high school and never let anyone forget it, had decided that Tuesday was the perfect day to reorganize the entire shipping department. Because nothing says team building like moving 2 tons of merchandise when you're already running on fumes and spite. By the time I stumbled out of that warehouse, I looked like I'd gone 10 rounds with a heavyweight boxer, and the heavyweight boxer was life itself. But did I get to go home and collapse into bed like a normal human being? Hell no. See, Clara had texted me earlier with her usual charm. We're out of literally everything. Figure it out. Not, please, not when you get a chance. Just a royal decree from Her Majesty, Queen of the Couch Cushions. So there I was at 9 p.m., fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps, pushing a shopping cart through Walmart like some kind of suburban zombie. My back was already screaming from the day's festivities, but Clara's grocery list read like she was planning to feed a small army. Organic this, gluten-free that, and enough wine to float a yacht. Because apparently, when you spend your days doing absolutely nothing, you work up quite the thirst. The checkout process was its own special kind of torture. The teenage cashier moved slower than government bureaucracy, and the total came to $347.82. $347. That was more than I made in a full day at the warehouse, and it would be gone faster than my patience during one of Clara's constructive criticism sessions. Loading those bags into my beat-up Honda Civic was like playing Tetris designed by someone who hated me personally. 12 bags of groceries in a car that was already held together by duct tape and false hope. The handles cut into my fingers, and I could feel my lower back staging a full rebellion against my spine. But the real fun started when I got home to our third-floor apartment. No elevator, of course, because that would be too convenient, and convenience was apparently against my religion. I stood at the bottom of those stairs, looking up like they were Mount Everest. Except Mount Everest doesn't judge you for being out of shape and smell vaguely of other people's garbage. First trip up, for bags and the distinct feeling that my arms might just detach from my shoulders out of pure protest. Second trip, 3 more bags and the realization that sweat was now dripping into my eyes like salty tears of regret. By the third trip, I was breathing harder than an obscene phone caller, and my legs felt like they were made of overcooked spaghetti. The final ascent nearly killed me. Those last 5 bags felt like they were filled with concrete blocks and broken dreams. My back screamed, my arms shook like I had some kind of neurological condition, and sweat was pouring down my neck like I was auditioning for a deodorant commercial, the before footage. When I finally kicked open our apartment door, gasping for breath like I'd just run a marathon through hell, I expected maybe a thank you, or even just basic human acknowledgement. Instead, I found Clara exactly where I'd left her that morning, parked on our couch like it was her personal throne, surrounded by her usual crew of enablers and wine glasses. She was holding court with her girlfriends, Jessica, who hadn't worked a day since Obama was in office, and Amanda, whose greatest life achievement was marrying a guy with a trust fund. They were all glued to some reality TV show, probably watching other people's manufactured drama while creating plenty of their own. I dropped the last bag onto our kitchen counter with about as much grace as a bowling ball hitting the pins, and that's when Clara decided to grace me with her attention. She turned around, took one look at my sweat-soaked, exhausted self, and wrinkled her nose like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. "Marcus," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of disgust usually reserved for discovering moldy leftovers. "You're getting disgusting to look at. You better lose that weight fast, or I'll find someone who actually takes care of himself." The room went dead silent for about half a second, and then her friends erupted into laughter. Not polite, uncomfortable chuckles, but full-throated, knee-slapping laughter, like she'd just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke. Jessica actually snorted wine through her nose, which would have been hilarious if it wasn't at my expense. Their laughter hit me like a physical blow, stinging worse than her actual words. Here I was, working my ass off to keep us afloat, sacrificing my health, my time, and apparently my dignity. And this was my reward, becoming the entertainment for her unemployed fan club. But here's the weird part. Instead of exploding, instead of telling her exactly where she could shove her opinion, instead of defending myself or pointing out that maybe I looked like hell because I was working myself to death to pay for her wine and organic quinoa, I just smiled at her. Calm as a lake on a windless day. She didn't know it yet. Hell, I barely knew it myself. But something fundamental had shifted inside me in that moment. Something that had been bending and bending under the weight of her constant criticism and casual cruelty finally snapped. Not broke, mind you. Snapped into place. That smile I gave her wasn't surrender. It was recognition. Recognition that I was done being her verbal punching bag. Done being the punchline to her jokes. Done carrying groceries up 3 flights of stairs just so she could insult me in front of her cheerleading squad of mediocrity. Clara smiled back, probably thinking she'd won another round in whatever sick game she thought we were playing. She had no idea that the Marcus who had walked up those stairs was already gone, and the Marcus who was standing in that kitchen, still dripping with sweat and dignity, was someone entirely different. The revolution had begun, and she didn't even know it. You know that feeling when you're standing at the edge of a diving board, looking down at the water, and your brain is screaming, "This is insane," while your gut whispers, "Jump already." That was me at 2:47 a.m., standing in our bedroom doorway, watching Clara sleep like a baby who'd just finished destroying someone's favorite toy. The woman was snoring softly, probably dreaming about new and creative ways to crush my soul, completely oblivious to the fact that her personal ATM was about to go permanently out of order. I'd been lying there for 3 hours, staring at the ceiling like it held the secrets to the universe, replaying that grocery store humiliation on an endless loop. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard their laughter echoing in my head like some twisted soundtrack to my misery. But somewhere between hour 2 and 3 of my involuntary insomnia marathon, something clicked. Not snapped, clicked. Like a puzzle piece finally finding its home. The plan formed in my head with startling clarity, probably because my subconscious had been working on this escape route for months without telling my conscious mind. I was going to pack my essentials and get the hell out of Dodge before Clara woke up and found new ways to remind me what a disappointment I was to the gene pool. Moving through that apartment felt like defusing a bomb in slow motion. Every floorboard creak sounded like a fire alarm. Every rustle of clothing felt like I was announcing my intentions over a megaphone. I grabbed my go-bag essentials with the precision of a Navy SEAL conducting a covert operation, except instead of enemy territory, I was navigating around Clara's collection of wine glasses and her shrine to reality TV celebrities. First priority, documents. Birth certificate, social security card, passport, driver's license. Basically everything that proved I existed as a human being rather than just Clara's personal servant. I'd hidden these in my toolbox months ago, buried under socket wrenches and electrical tape, because God forbid Clara ever discovered I had an identity separate from guy who brings her stuff. Next up, my work laptop, the one piece of technology in this house that Clara couldn't contaminate with her endless social media drama and shopping addictions. That laptop represented my professional life, my skills, my ticket to financial independence. It was going with me if I had to strap it to my back like a technological baby carrier. A change of clothes came next, though honestly, my wardrobe wasn't exactly going to win any fashion awards. 3 jobs don't leave much budget for updating your look beyond clean enough not to get fired. But I grabbed my least wrinkled shirt and my one pair of jeans that didn't have permanent knee stains from crawling around fixing other people's problems. The whole packing process took maybe 15 minutes, but it felt like I was moving through quicksand made of anxiety and determination. Every few seconds, I'd pause and listen for any sign that Clara was stirring, ready to abort the mission if she so much as shifted positions. But she kept sleeping the sleep of the innocent, which was ironic considering she had the innocence of a lone shark. Walking out of that apartment was surreal as hell. I stood in the doorway for a moment, looking back at 3 years of my life that I was about to flush down the toilet of bad decisions. Our living room, with its collection of throw pillows that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. The kitchen where I'd prepared countless meals that Clara critiqued like she was Gordon Ramsay's evil twin. The bedroom where intimate moments had become rarer than honest politicians. But you know what? I didn't feel sad. I felt lighter, like I'd been carrying around a backpack full of rocks, and had finally realized I could just take the damn thing off. The drive to the hotel was peaceful in a way that caught me off guard. No Clara in the passenger seat telling me I was taking the wrong route, or that I was driving too fast, too slow, or breathing too loudly. Just me, the radio playing some late-night jazz, and the city lights blurring past like they were waving goodbye to my old life. I chose the Comfort Inn on Maple Street, about 10 minutes from downtown. Close enough to civilization, but far enough from Clara's usual haunts that I wouldn't accidentally run into her during her daily expedition to spend money we didn't have. The night clerk barely looked up from his phone when I requested a room for indefinite stay, which was perfect because I wasn't in the mood for small talk about my life choices. Room 247 became my sanctuary. It wasn't much to look at. Generic hotel furniture that had seen better decades, carpet that probably harbored mysteries I didn't want to solve, and artwork that looked like it was selected by someone who hated both art and people. But it was mine. Mine to mess up, mine to organize, mine to exist in without judgment or commentary from the peanut gallery. The silence was what hit me first. Not the peaceful kind of silence you get at a library or meditation retreat. This was the deep, profound silence of not having someone constantly reminding you of your shortcomings. No reality TV blaring in the background. No phone conversations about whose husband was the biggest disappointment this week. No running commentary on everything I did wrong. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my work clothes, and just listened to the absence of Clara's voice. It was beautiful. That's when my phone buzzed with the first text message from my beloved wife. I figured it would be something like, "Where are you?" Or maybe, "What the hell is going on?" You know, normal concerned spouse reactions to discovering your partner had vanished in the middle of the night. Instead, I got this gem. "Did you buy almond milk?" Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "I'm worried about you." Not even, "Did you leave me?" Just a grocery inquiry like I was her personal shopping assistant who'd forgotten to punch the time clock. I stared at that message for a full minute, reading it over and over again like it might suddenly transform into something resembling basic human concern. But nope. There it was in black and white, the perfect summary of my entire marriage. Clara's first thought upon discovering my absence wasn't my safety or our relationship. It was whether she'd have the right kind of milk for her morning coffee. That text message was like getting confirmation that I'd just made the best decision of my adult life. Here I was, having what could generously be called an emotional breakthrough, and she was worried about dairy alternatives. I turned off my phone, kicked off my work boots, and lay down on that questionably clean hotel comforter. The ceiling had a water stain that looked vaguely like Texas, and I found myself staring at it while whispering the words that had been building up inside me for years. This isn't living. This is surviving. And I deserve better. The words hung in the air like a promise I was making to myself. For the first time in longer than I cared to remember, I felt something that had been buried under years of criticism and casual cruelty. Hope. Tomorrow, I'd have to figure out the logistics of this whole situation. Tonight, I was just going to enjoy the sound of my own breathing without someone telling me I was doing it wrong. You ever watch those nature documentaries where the gazelle pretends to be injured to throw off the lion, then suddenly bolts when the predator gets too close? Well, Turns out I had some serious gazelle energy brewing inside me, because the next morning I walked back into that apartment ready to give an Oscar-worthy performance as Marcus Hall, the apologetic husband. I'd spent the night in that hotel room planning my approach like I was preparing for the most important job interview of my life. Except instead of trying to get hired, I was trying to get divorced without Clara realizing it until the papers were already signed, sealed, and delivered by someone wearing a badge. The first challenge was my key. Did Clara change the locks? Had she already called a locksmith and told some sob story about her deadbeat husband who probably ran off with his secretary? Joke's on her. I didn't have a secretary. Hell, I barely had a desk. But no, the key turned smooth as butter, which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously Clara was taking my disappearance. She probably figured I'd slept in my car again after one of our discussions, which had happened exactly once after she threw a wine glass at my head for forgetting to TiVo her favorite show. I walked in around 8 a.m., timing it perfectly for Clara's usual morning routine. Stumble to the kitchen, complain about everything in a 5-mile radius, consume enough coffee to power a small aircraft, then settle into her throne, our couch, for a full day of professional unemployment. She was standing in the kitchen in her ratty bathrobe, the one that cost more than my work boots but looked like it had been through a blender, holding her phone and wearing that expression she got when life dared to inconvenience her. The same look she'd give a waiter who brought her the wrong brand of sparkling water. "Oh, look who decided to come home," she said, not even bothering to look up from whatever social media disaster she was scrolling through. "Let me guess, you fell asleep in your car like some kind of homeless person because you got your feelings hurt." Here's where the old Marcus would have started explaining, justifying, apologizing for having the audacity to react to being humiliated in front of her friends. The old Marcus would have launched into some pathetic speech about working 3 jobs and being tired and how maybe she could show a little appreciation once in a while. But the new Marcus? The new Marcus was method acting like his life depended on it. "You're absolutely right," I said, hanging my head like a dog who'd been caught chewing the furniture. "I was being way too sensitive about the whole thing. I know you were just joking around with the girls." Clara's head snapped up from her phone faster than a mousetrap. She wasn't expecting agreement. She was geared up for a fight, loaded with ammunition about how I was too emotional and couldn't take a simple joke. My immediate surrender threw off her whole battle plan. "Well," she said, clearly disappointed that I wasn't giving her the drama she'd been preparing for, "at least you're finally being reasonable about it. You've just been so moody lately, Marcus. Don't make everything so dramatic." Moody? That was rich. Apparently, working myself into the ground to pay for her lifestyle while she critiqued my appearance was me being moody. But I just nodded like a bobblehead in an earthquake. "You're totally right. I've been under a lot of stress with work, and I took it out on you. That wasn't fair." I even managed to look genuinely contrite while delivering that load of grade-A bullshit. Clara smirked like she'd just won the lottery and discovered world peace in the same afternoon. That smirk was going to fuel me through the next few weeks of this charade. She thought she'd broken me, trained me, turned me into the perfectly obedient husband who would apologize for existing if she asked nicely enough. "Apology accepted," she said magnanimously, like she was the Queen of England pardoning some peasant for breathing too loudly. "Just remember that next time before you go storming off like a teenager." I nodded again, playing my role perfectly while mentally drafting my divorce attorney Google search. Because yes, while Clara was basking in her imaginary victory, I was already planning phase 2 of Operation Get the Hell Out of This Marriage. The rest of that morning was a masterclass in performance art. I made her coffee exactly the way she liked it. 2 sugars, splash of that expensive oat milk she insisted on, stirred. Counterclockwise because apparently clockwise stirring was for amateurs. I asked about her plans for the day like I actually cared whether she was going to spend the afternoon judging other people's life choices or just online shopping with money we didn't have. "Jessica and Amanda are coming over later," she announced, settling into her couch kingdom with her coffee and phone. "We're planning Sarah's bachelorette party. You can make yourself scarce, right? Maybe go tinker with something in the garage." Translation: disappear so I don't have to acknowledge your existence while my friends and I drink wine that costs more than your hourly wage and talk about what disappointments our husbands are. "Of course," I said cheerfully. "I've got some projects to work on anyway. What I actually had was a consultation appointment with divorce attorney number 1 on my list, scheduled for 2 p.m. during my lunch break from the gas station. I'd done my research the night before in that hotel room, cross-referencing reviews and success rates like I was hiring a surgeon to remove a tumor, which, in a way, I was. The beauty of working 3 jobs was that Clara had absolutely no idea what my actual schedule looked like. She knew I left early and came home late, but the specifics were as mysterious to her as quantum physics or basic human decency. This gave me plenty of cover for extracurricular activities like planning my escape from our matrimonial house of horrors. I spent the morning being the perfect husband, agreeing with everything she said, laughing at her non-jokes, even complimenting her hair, which looked like she'd stuck her finger in an electrical socket. Every smile, every nod, every, "You're so right, honey," was another brick in the wall I was building between my old life and my new one. But here's the thing about pretending to be someone you're not. It's exhausting as hell. By the time I left for my first job, my face hurt from fake smiling, and my soul felt like it had been through a cheese grater. Clara was so pleased with her victory that she actually waved goodbye from the couch, like she was dismissing a servant who'd finally learned proper behavior. I waved back, walked out that door, and immediately started documenting everything. Every insult, every demand, every moment of casual cruelty was going into my mental filing cabinet, soon to be transferred to actual legal documents that would make Clara's smug expression disappear faster than her respect for our marriage vows. The gazelle was still playing injured, but the lion had no idea that the real hunt was just beginning. If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be living like a character in a spy movie, I would have laughed until I pulled something. But there I was, Marcus Hall. Mild-mannered warehouse worker by day, gas station attendant by evening, handyman by weekend, and secret divorce operative 24/7. I was basically Clark Kent, except instead of fighting crime, I was fighting for my financial survival and what was left of my sanity. Working 3 jobs was already like juggling flaming chainsaws while riding a unicycle on a tightrope, but now I'd added a 4th full-time occupation, professional escape artist. The logistics alone were enough to make a NASA mission planner weep with frustration. I had to coordinate bank visits, lawyer meetings, document gathering, and evidence collection around a work schedule that would make sweatshop owners feel guilty. My days started at 5:30 a.m. with the warehouse job, where I spent 8 hours moving boxes and pretending to care about productivity metrics while actually planning my next covert operation. During my 15-minute breaks, I'd duck behind the loading dock and make hushed phone calls to attorneys, speaking in code like I was ordering pizza instead of discussing asset division and emotional abuse documentation. Yeah, I'd like to schedule a consultation about, changing my living situation. I'd whisper into my phone while my coworkers probably thought I was having some kind of midlife crisis. Which, to be fair, wasn't entirely wrong. The gas station gig from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. became my mobile command center. Between customers asking me to check their tire pressure and explain why gas prices were higher than their mortgage payments, I'd research divorce laws on my phone, memorize legal terms, and draft notes about Clara's latest adventures in psychological warfare. Let me tell you, there's nothing quite like learning about marital property division while some guy in a lifted truck yells at you because his lottery tickets didn't win. "Sir, I understand your frustration about those scratch-offs, but I'm currently trying to figure out if emotional abuse counts as grounds for divorce in this state. So maybe dial down the rage about your gambling problem." The weekend handyman work became my therapy sessions. Nothing quite clears your head like installing someone else's kitchen cabinets while plotting the dismantling of your own domestic disaster. Plus, homeowners love to overshare about their personal lives, and I was getting a PhD in dysfunctional relationships just by listening to their stories while fixing their leaky faucets. "Oh, Marcus, you're so lucky to be married," Mrs. Henderson told me while I repaired her garbage disposal. My ex-husband was such a selfish bastard. Never appreciated anything I did for him. I just nodded and kept working, thinking, "Lady, if you only knew what I'm dealing with, you'd probably offer to help me hide Clara's body." But the real adventure started when I began my covert financial operations. Opening a new bank account when you're married is like trying to perform surgery with oven mitts. Technically possible, but requiring way more finesse than should be legally necessary. I had to find a bank across town where none of Clara's friends worked, time my visits perfectly to avoid her shopping expeditions, and explain to confused tellers why I wanted an account with only my name on it. "Is this for a business?" the banker asked, looking at me like I was trying to launder money for the mob. "Something like that," I said, which was technically true if you considered escaping my marriage a full-time business venture. The money transfers were the most nerve-wracking part of this whole operation. I couldn't just drain our joint account. That would tip off Clara faster than a bad spy movie reveal. Instead, I had to be strategic, moving small amounts over time like I was slowly bleeding air out of a tire so no one would notice until it was completely flat. I'd transfer $50 here, $75 there, always with plausible explanations ready in case Clara ever bothered to check our statements, which she never did because she assumed money just magically appeared in our account like some kind of financial fairy godmother. Gas money, I'd tell myself as I moved another chunk of cash to my escape fund. Groceries, work expenses, tools for the handyman jobs. Each transfer was another step toward freedom, another brick removed from the prison I'd built around myself. But then came the discovery that nearly made me lose my mind completely. I was organizing our paperwork for tax season, because of course Clara had dumped that responsibility on me along with everything else, when I found credit card statements for an account I'd never seen before. Capital One Venture Card. Marcus and Clara Hall. Credit limit, $8,000. Current balance, $7,847. I stared at that statement like it was written in hieroglyphics, trying to process what I was seeing. Clara had opened a credit card in both our names without telling me, then proceeded to max it out on shopping sprees that would make a real housewife jealous. $8,000 of debt that I knew nothing about, all spent on designer handbags, spa treatments, and what appeared to be an entire wardrobe from Nordstrom. The itemized charges read like a guide to financial irresponsibility. $347 at Sephora, $892 at some boutique I'd never heard of, $156 for a relaxation massage, because apparently being unemployed was stressful, and my personal favorite, $73 at Bath & Body Works, because nothing says responsible spending, like buying enough lotion to moisturize a small country. I sat in our kitchen, surrounded by evidence of Clara's secret shopping addiction, feeling like I'd just discovered my wife was leading a double life as a professional spender. The rage that bubbled up inside me was so intense I had to grip the kitchen counter to keep from throwing something through the window. But then my phone rang, and I had to shift back into Marcus the loving husband mode, because Clara was calling to ask me to pick up dinner on my way home from work. "Something good," she said, like I was her personal chef instead of a guy who'd just discovered she'd been financially betraying me for months. "I've had such a stressful day." Stressful, right? The stress of deciding which credit card to use for her next shopping expedition. "Of course, honey," I said through gritted teeth, already planning how this little financial surprise was going to play out in divorce court. "Any particular preference?" "Surprise me," she chirped, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd already given me the biggest surprise of our marriage. I hung up and immediately called my lawyer, Andrew Morrison, who'd become my favorite person in the entire world despite charging me more per hour than I made in a day. "Andrew, we need to add fraud to our list of Clara's greatest hits," I said, explaining my credit card discovery while pacing around the gas station parking lot like a caged animal. "Document everything," he said, which had become his catchphrase. "Every statement, every charge, every receipt you can find. This is going to be very helpful for our case." That night, my sister Rachel became my confidant and co-conspirator. She'd been watching my marriage implode for years, biting her tongue, while Clara treated family gatherings like opportunities to publicly critique my life choices. When I called her and explained the credit card situation, the silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "That manipulative bitch," Rachel finally said, and hearing my sweet, normally diplomatic sister drop the B-bomb was somehow both shocking and incredibly validating. "I'm storing documents at your place," I told her. "Evidence, bank statements, recordings, everything. If Clara finds out what I'm doing before I'm ready." "She won't," Rachel said fiercely. "We're getting you out of this, Marcus." I should have said something years ago. The double life was exhausting, sure, but every secret bank transfer, every hidden document, Every covert lawyer meeting was another link in the chain I was using to pull myself out of the quicksand of my marriage. Clara thought she had me trapped, financially dependent, and emotionally beaten down. She had no idea that the chains were already breaking, one secret at a time. You know how they say that pride comes before the fall? Well, in Clara's case, her pride was about to take a nosedive off the Empire State Building, but she was too busy polishing her crown of narcissism to notice the ground rushing up to meet her. Meanwhile, I was collecting every cruel word, every public humiliation, every casual cruelty like they were baseball cards, except instead of trading them with friends, I was saving them for my divorce attorney's greatest hits album. Clara's cruelty had evolved from casual insults delivered in private to full-blown public performances, like she'd decided our marriage was her personal comedy show, and I was the perpetual opening act that nobody wanted to see. Her friends had become her audience, her cheerleading squad of enablement, and our apartment had transformed into their personal clubhouse where unemployed women gathered to judge the world and consume wine like it was going out of style. The invasions became a regular thing. I'd drag my exhausted ass home after pulling double shifts, dreaming of maybe 20 minutes of peace to decompress from dealing with customers who thought I was personally responsible for everything wrong with the retail experience, only to find Jessica, Amanda, and whatever rotating cast of Mean Girls Clara had collected sprawled across our furniture like they were auditioning for a reality show called Housewives of Mediocrity. This particular Friday night was special, though. I'd worked a double shift at the warehouse, 16 hours of moving inventory that weighed more than my will to live, followed by 4 hours at the gas station dealing with customers who seemed personally offended that I couldn't control global oil prices with my magical cashier powers. My back felt like someone had replaced my spine with a rusty coat hanger. My feet were screaming inside my work boots, and I was pretty sure I smelled like a combination of diesel fuel and defeat. All I wanted was to collapse face first into bed and pretend the world didn't exist for approximately 8 hours. Instead, I walked into what looked like a wine-tasting event hosted by the cast of Mean Girls, the middle-aged edition. Clara was holding court from her throne, our couch that she'd claimed with the territorial instincts of a rabid badger, surrounded by her usual suspects. Jessica, who'd perfected the art of living off her husband's insurance money while complaining about how hard her life was. Amanda, whose greatest achievement was marrying a guy whose daddy owned a chain of tire stores, giving her just enough money to look down on people who actually worked for a living. And tonight's special guest star was Brenda, a woman whose personality was so toxic that houseplants probably died from being in the same room with her. They were deep into their 4th bottle of wine, the expensive stuff that cost more than I made in a day. And the conversation had reached that special level of cattiness that only happened when unemployed women gathered to solve the world's problems through gossip and alcohol. "Oh, Marcus," Clara called out when she spotted me standing in the doorway like a deer caught in headlights. Perfect timing. "We need food." Not, "Hi, honey, how was work?" Not, "You look exhausted. Why don't you sit down?" Just a direct order disguised as an observation, delivered with the casual authority of someone who'd forgotten that other people were actual humans with feelings and physical limitations. "The girls are hungry," she continued, gesturing toward her audience like she was introducing performers at a circus. "Pizza would be good, and we're running low on wine. There's that place on 5th Street that delivers both, right?" I stood there for a moment, processing her request while my brain tried to catch up with my body's complete and utter exhaustion. The place on 5th Street was 20 minutes away, their delivery minimum was $60, and I'd already spent 10 hours on my feet dealing with people who treated service workers like we were slightly more useful than furniture. "Clara," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice level, "I just worked 16 hours. I'm completely wiped out. Maybe we could just order something simple, or—" "Oh my God," Brenda interrupted, letting out that special laugh that Mean Girls perfect in middle school and never grow out of. "Are you seriously complaining about getting food? That's literally the least you could do." The other women giggled like Brenda had just delivered the punchline to the world's funniest joke, and Clara's face lit up with that expression she got when someone else was doing her dirty work for her. "Right," Clara said, turning to address her audience while gesturing at me like I was Exhibit A in a museum of disappointing husbands. "Pregnancy, periods, exhaustion. Men always make excuses for everything. Just do it, Marcus. It's not that complicated. The room erupted in agreement. Jessica nodded so vigorously I was worried she might give herself whiplash. Amanda made some comment about how her husband used to pull the same tired from work routine until she trained him out of it. Brenda launched into a story about her ex-boyfriend who dared to suggest he was too exhausted for something, and how she'd solved that problem by finding someone with more energy. I stood there listening to this panel of relationship experts, none of whom had worked a day in the past 5 years, explain to me how unreasonable it was to be tired after working 20 hours straight. The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a knife and served it as a side dish. But here's the thing about being in survival mode. Sometimes you just do what you have to do to get through the day. So I nodded, grabbed my keys, and headed back out into the night to fetch food and alcohol for Clara's fan club, while they continued their deep philosophical discussion about what disappointments their husbands were. The pizza place was a nightmare. Friday night rush, understaffed, and full of college kids who'd already started their weekend celebrations early. I stood in line for 30 minutes, surrounded by people who were having fun while I was running errands for adults who'd apparently never learned how to operate a phone to place their own orders. The wine store was worse. The clerk looked at me like I was buying supplies for an intervention, probably because I was purchasing enough alcohol to stock a small bar, while looking like I'd been hit by a truck driven by despair. When I finally made it back home, loaded down with enough food to feed a small army, and enough wine to pickle a medium-sized vegetable, the conversation had shifted to critiquing other people's life choices, which was rich considering the source. "Marcus," Clara called out as I dropped the bags on the kitchen counter with all the grace of a bag of cement hitting concrete. "You forgot to get plates." Not "thank you." Not "you're the best for doing this when you're exhausted." Just another item added to my list of failures, delivered with the tone of someone who discovered I'd accidentally set the house on fire. I was digging through our cabinet, looking for paper plates because apparently our regular dishes weren't good enough for Clara's wine-tasting tribunal, when the conversation in the living room took a turn that made my blood run cold. "I swear, sometimes I think Marcus is getting worse instead of better," Clara said, her voice carrying that tone she used when she was about to deliver what she thought was comedy gold. "Look at him over there, huffing and puffing like getting dinner is some kind of Olympic event." The laughter that followed was like nails on a chalkboard made of my remaining self-respect. But Clara wasn't done with her performance. "Honestly," she continued, really warming up to her theme now, "at least be useful for something, you know? If you're going to be tired all the time, maybe hit the gym occasionally so you're at least nice to look at while you're complaining." The silence that followed was deafening, like the moment right before a bomb goes off. Then the laughter started, not polite chuckles, but full-throated, knee-slapping, wine-snorting laughter that seemed to go on forever. I stood there in the kitchen, holding a stack of paper plates, listening to my wife and her friends laugh at my expense like I was the entertainment for the evening. Every cruel word burned itself into my memory, adding fuel to the fire that was already burning inside me. But I didn't explode. I didn't defend myself. I didn't point out that maybe. I was tired because I was working myself to death to pay for their wine and pizza parties. Instead, I just delivered their food, smiled politely, and retreated to the bedroom where I pulled out my phone and added every single word to my growing collection of evidence. Later that night, after Clara's audience had finally gone home and she'd fallen asleep next to me like nothing had happened, I lay there in the dark, clutching my plan tighter than ever. Every insult, every public humiliation, every moment of casual cruelty was another piece of ammunition in the battle I was preparing to fight. The revolution was coming, and Clara had just provided me with enough evidence to win the war. Sometimes the universe hands you a gift wrapped in the most ordinary packaging, and you don't realize it's Christmas morning until you're already tearing off the bough. Clara's announcement that she was planning a weekend trip to her mother's house was delivered with all the ceremony of someone mentioning they were going to get milk. But to me, it sounded like the Hallelujah chorus being performed by a choir of angels who specialized in divorce planning. "I'm going to Mom's this weekend," she said casually while scrolling through her phone, probably shopping for more things we couldn't afford. "She wants to discuss the family reunion planning, and you know how she gets when she doesn't have my input on everything." I nodded like this was perfectly normal news instead of the break I'd been praying for since I started Operation Get the Hell Out of This Marriage. Clara's mother, Patricia, was basically Clara with 30 more years of practice in making people miserable, so these visits usually lasted the entire weekend while they bonded over criticizing everyone they'd ever met. That sounds great, I said, probably a little too enthusiastically, because Clara looked up from her phone with that suspicious expression she got when I showed any sign of independent thought. You'll be fine here by yourself, right? Try not to burn the place down or anything. Right, because clearly my 38 years on this planet had taught me nothing about basic survival skills. But I just smiled and nodded, already mentally calling Rachel to activate phase one of what I'd started thinking of as Operation Liberation Day. The moment Clara's car disappeared around the corner on Friday evening, I was on the phone faster than a teenager calling in sick to work. "Rachel, it's showtime," I said, probably sounding like I was planning a bank heist instead of moving my own belongings out of my own apartment. "I'll be there in an hour with Daniel and the van," she replied, and I could hear the barely contained excitement in her voice. My sister had been watching this train wreck of a marriage for 3 years, biting her tongue, while Clara treated family gatherings like opportunities to demonstrate her superiority over everyone with actual jobs. Rachel arrived with her boyfriend Daniel, who'd volunteered for this mission after witnessing Clara's performance at last Christmas dinner. The woman had actually critiqued the way I carved the turkey, suggesting that maybe I should watch some YouTube videos to learn proper technique, while the entire family sat there in stunned silence. "Dude," Daniel had told me later, "I've seen some toxic relationships, but your wife takes it to an art form." Now here he was, ready to help me escape from that art form, along with the rented moving van that was going to be my chariot to freedom. Leo showed up 20 minutes later, carrying a 6-pack of beer and wearing the grim expression of a man on a mission. Leo had been my best friend since college, back when I was a functioning human being with self-respect and opinions. He'd watched Clara slowly chip away at my personality like a sculptor working on a particularly stubborn piece of marble, except instead of creating something beautiful, she was just making me smaller. "I've been waiting 3 years for this phone call," he said, setting down the beer and rolling up his sleeves. "Let's get you the hell out of here." The plan was simple: move fast, move everything that was mine, and leave no trace except for the divorce papers and evidence that would be waiting for Clara when she got back. We had approximately 48 hours to execute a complete life extraction, and honestly, it felt like we were planning a military operation. Rachel had brought printed checklists, because my sister was the kind of person who organized her grocery lists by aisle, and she'd assigned everyone specific zones. Daniel got my tools and work equipment, Leo handled electronics and books, Rachel took care of important documents and anything sentimental, and I focused on clothes and personal items. "Remember," Rachel said, addressing our little team like a general briefing troops, "we only take things that belong to Marcus or that he paid for. No matter how tempting it might be to accidentally pack some of Clara's stuff as a little payback, we're taking the high road." Daniel raised his hand like we were in school. "Question, what if we accidentally drop something valuable while we're moving?" "Accidents happen," Leo said solemnly, "but we're all very careful people." The first hour was almost fun, like the world's most purposeful scavenger hunt. My tools went into boxes with the efficiency of a Formula One pit crew. 3 years' worth of accumulated books, DVDs, and the few pieces of electronics that Clara hadn't claimed as community property disappeared into carefully labeled containers. But then we got to the personal stuff, and the reality of what I was doing hit me like a freight train carrying a cargo of emotions I wasn't prepared to handle. My dad's old toolbox, the one he'd given me when I moved out for college, packed with advice about treating tools with respect because they'd be treating me with respect for the rest of my life. The framed photo of my parents from their 25th wedding anniversary, back when I still believed in the possibility of lasting happiness. My grandfather's watch, which Clara had always hated because it wasn't expensive enough to impress her friends. "You okay, man?" Leo asked, finding me standing in the bedroom holding a shoebox full of letters my grandmother had written me during college. "Yeah," I said, though my voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere far away. "It's just weird, you know? Packing up 3 years of your life into boxes." 3 years of surviving, Rachel corrected from the doorway, where she was holding a garbage bag full of Clara's ridiculous throw pillows that had somehow migrated into our bedroom. You're not packing up your life, Marcus. You're packing up your stuff so you can go live your actual life. The hardest part was deciding what to do with the few things we'd bought together, wedding gifts, furniture we'd picked out during those early days when I still thought we were building something instead of just marking time until Clara got bored with playing house. Leave it, I finally decided. Anything we bought together, she can keep. I want to start completely fresh. By evening, we were loading the last boxes into the van while the sun set behind us like it was providing dramatic lighting for the final scene of my marriage. The apartment looked strange with all my belongings gone. Bigger somehow, but also emptier, like all the personality had been sucked out of it. Rachel was taking photos of everything for the legal record, while Leo and Daniel secured the last of the boxes in the van. I stood in the doorway of what had been my home for 3 years, looking around at the space that would soon be just Clara's kingdom of misery. Any regrets? Rachel asked, coming to stand beside me. I thought about it for a moment, really considered whether I was making a mistake, whether I should try harder to fix things, whether this was just me being dramatic about normal marriage problems. Then I remembered Clara's laughter echoing through this apartment while her friends applauded her latest creative insult, and the answer became crystal clear. None, I said, and meant it completely. The drive to my new apartment felt like traveling to another planet where the atmosphere was made of possibility instead of criticism. 1 bedroom, affordable rent, a kitchen where I could cook without someone critiquing my technique, and a living room where I could exist without being judged for breathing too loudly. When we finally finished unloading all the boxes, the 4 of us stood in my new space drinking Leo's beer and looking around at the stacks of my entire life, waiting to be unpacked and reorganized. So this is freedom, I said, raising my bottle in a toast. This is just the beginning, Rachel corrected, clinking her bottle against mine. For the first time in years, I felt something that had been buried under layers of criticism and casual cruelty. Peace. It was going to be a good weekend. You know that moment in movies where the hero walks away from an explosion in slow motion, never looking back, while everything they're leaving behind burns to the ground? Well, my version was less Hollywood blockbuster and more like a methodical demolition expert making sure every charge was placed perfectly before detonating 3 years of matrimonial misery. And let me tell you, I was about to create the most beautiful explosion Clara had ever seen. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything seem possible, like the universe was giving me perfect weather for the most important performance of my life. Clara was due back around dinner time, which gave me exactly 8 hours to complete the final phase of Operation You Wanted Someone Better, so here's your chance. The apartment felt different now, hollow, like a movie set after the actors had gone home. All my stuff was gone, but Clara wouldn't notice that immediately, because she never really paid attention to my belongings anyway. She'd probably assume I was just being neater than usual, before gradually realizing that her personal servant had permanently clocked out. I spent the morning arranging my farewell presentation on the kitchen counter like I was curating an art exhibit titled The End of Your Free Ride. The divorce papers went in the center, positioned perfectly so they'd be the first thing she saw when she walked in. These weren't just any papers. These were the legal equivalent of a nuclear bomb, prepared by Andrew Morrison with the precision of a surgeon and the ruthlessness of a shark who'd skipped lunch. Next to the papers, I placed a manila folder containing what my lawyer had dubbed the greatest hits collection. Printouts of every fraudulent credit card charge, bank statements showing her unauthorized spending sprees, and a detailed timeline of her financial betrayal. $8,000 of debt she'd hidden from me, itemized and highlighted like a shopping list from hell. The credit card statements were particularly damning when laid out chronologically. You could literally watch Clara's spending escalate from occasional splurges to full-blown financial adultery. $347 here, $892 there, building up to that spectacular $1,200 day when she'd apparently decided to single-handedly support the entire beauty industry. But the real masterpiece was the folder labeled Evidence of Emotional Abuse, a term I'd learned from my lawyer that made Clara's behavior sound exactly as criminal as it felt. Inside were printed screenshots of text messages, transcripts of recorded conversations, perfectly legal in our state, thank you very much, and a detailed log of every public humiliation, every casual cruelty, Every moment she treated me like a defective household appliance. Reading through that collection was like reviewing the lowlights of the worst reality show ever produced. Except the unfortunate star of the show was my self-esteem, and the villain was the woman I'd promised to love and cherish until death did us part. Apparently, death wasn't going to be necessary. Divorce papers worked just fine. The handwritten note took me 3 drafts to get right. The first version was too angry, full of years of suppressed rage and bitter sarcasm that would have felt good to write, but wouldn't have served my purposes. The second was too explanatory, like I was still trying to justify my decision to someone who'd never respected my opinions anyway. The final version was perfect in its simplicity. Clara, you wanted someone better. Go find them. I've already found freedom. 22 words that summarized 3 years of marriage and 38 years of learning that I deserved better than being someone's verbal punching bag. I folded it carefully and placed it on top of the divorce papers like a farewell card from a relationship that had died of neglect and cruelty. The beauty of my timing was that Clara's weekend at her mother's house meant she'd be returning in full Patricia-induced rage mode. Spending 48 hours with a woman who'd perfected the art of passive-aggressive criticism usually left Clara looking for someone to take her frustration out on, and that someone had always been me. Except this time, instead of finding her favorite target waiting to absorb her bad mood, she'd find legal documentation of why her favorite target had permanently relocated to a place where her opinions couldn't reach him. I took one last walk through the apartment, checking for anything I might have missed, any trace of Marcus the husband that needed to be erased. The closet where my clothes used to hang looked like a mouth with half its teeth missing. The bathroom counter where my toothbrush and shaving cream once lived was conspicuously empty. The garage where I'd stored my tools was now just a concrete box full of Clara's seasonal decorations and exercise equipment she'd used exactly twice. Every missing item was like a breadcrumb leading back to the truth she'd have to face. I was gone, and I wasn't coming back. Around noon, Rachel called to check on my progress and my mental state. "How are you holding up?" she asked, probably expecting me to be second-guessing myself or having some kind of emotional breakdown now that the reality was setting in. Honestly, I feel like I just woke up from a 3-year coma. I told her, standing in my empty kitchen and looking at my carefully arranged farewell exhibition. I keep waiting for the guilt to kick in, but all I feel is relief. "Good," she said fiercely, "because you've got nothing to feel guilty about. Clara made her choices, and now she gets to live with the consequences." That afternoon, I drove to my new apartment and spent a few hours unpacking boxes, creating the foundation of a life where I wouldn't have to apologize for existing. Every item I pulled out of those boxes felt like a small resurrection. My books could be displayed without someone critiquing my taste in literature. My coffee mug could sit on the counter without being moved to a better location. My laundry could exist in my bedroom without being subjected to commentary about my organizational skills. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that at exactly 6:47 p.m., I timed Clara's return based on 3 years of her predictable patterns. She would walk into that apartment expecting to find her faithful servant ready to hear about her weekend of family drama and maternal criticism. Instead, she'd find the legal equivalent of a resignation letter, a bill for 3 years of emotional labor, and a detailed explanation of why her employment as my wife had been permanently terminated. Rachel texted me later that evening. Daniel drove by the apartment around 7 p.m., saw Clara's car in the driveway, and heard what sounded like a banshee convention through the windows. "I think she found your presentation." The mental image of Clara discovering my carefully curated collection of legal documents and financial evidence made me smile for the first time in months. All those wine glasses she'd thrown during our arguments, all those dishes she'd hurled when life dared to inconvenience her. Apparently, she'd found a worthy target for her rage in the divorce papers that were about to make her life significantly more complicated. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since about 7:15 p.m., lighting up with calls and texts that escalated from confusion to rage to bargaining to threats, like the 5 stages of grief compressed into a single evening of cellular communication. I'd turned off the sound and let them accumulate like digital snow, building up into a blizzard of desperation that I had absolutely no intention of dealing with tonight, tomorrow, or ever. The revolution was complete, and Clara had finally gotten exactly what she'd been asking for all along. The chance to find someone better than the man who'd spent 3 years carrying her groceries, paying her bills, and absorbing her cruelty. The only difference was that now she'd have to do it without me. Freedom, it turns out, has a very specific sound: silence. Not the oppressive, walking on eggshells silence of trying not to wake a sleeping dragon, but the peaceful, holy shit it can breathe again silence of a life without constant criticism. My new apartment didn't just feel different from the old one. It felt like I'd moved to a parallel universe where I was allowed to exist without a running commentary on my failures as a human being. The place was small, sure, but it was mine in a way that our old apartment never had been. Clara had claimed every square inch of that space like a territorial animal marking its domain, filling it with her opinions about how things should be arranged, which furniture was acceptable, and why my personal belongings were visual pollution that needed to be hidden or eliminated entirely. Here, in my modest one-bedroom sanctuary, I could put a coffee mug on the counter without someone moving it to a better location. I could leave a book open on the kitchen table without being lectured about clutter management. I could exist in my own space without feeling like I was constantly auditioning for the role of acceptable human being. The first thing I did was build a kitchen table with my own 2 hands, using the tools Clara had always complained about storing in our garage. Nothing fancy, just pine boards and basic joinery, but it was solid, functional, and completely mine. Every cut, every joint, every sanded surface was a small declaration of independence from a woman who'd spent 3 years telling me that everything I created was somehow insufficient. Sitting at that table with my first cup of coffee in my new place felt like a religious experience. No one critiqued my coffee-making technique. No one suggested I was drinking too much caffeine. No one wondered aloud why I couldn't make coffee that tasted as good as Starbucks, ignoring the fact that Starbucks had industrial-grade equipment and I had a $20 coffee maker from Target. The bed assembly was another victory lap in the marathon of reclaiming my life. Clara had always insisted on expensive bedding that looked good but felt like sleeping on cardboard, chosen primarily for how it photographed for her social media accounts rather than for actual comfort. My new bed had sheets that felt like clouds and a comforter that didn't require a degree in textile engineering to properly arrange each morning. But the real transformation happened when I started decorating with things that actually meant something to me. On the dresser, I placed a framed photo of my parents from their 40th anniversary party. The one where Dad had given a speech about how marriage was supposed to make you feel like the best version of yourself, not a constant disappointment. Clara had always hated that photo, claiming it made the room look too sentimental, which I now realized was code for too human. Next to my parents' photo, I put up a picture of Rachel and me from last Christmas, both of us laughing at something ridiculous while Clara glowered in the background, probably annoyed that we were having fun without her permission. My sister's smile in that photo reminded me what genuine happiness looked like, as opposed to the performance art of contentment I'd been putting on for 3 years. The living room became my masterpiece of personal expression. Instead of Clara's collection of throw pillows that cost more than my weekly grocery budget and served no purpose except to be constantly rearranged, I had actual furniture designed for human comfort. A couch where I could sit without being told I was ruining the aesthetic. A coffee table where I could put my feet up without being lectured about proper furniture respect. Work became something entirely different when you weren't dreading coming home. My warehouse shifts, which had felt like prison sentences when I knew I'd be returning to another evening of criticism and casual cruelty, suddenly became just work. 8 hours of moving boxes, solving logistics problems, and dealing with the occasional workplace drama that seemed refreshingly simple compared to navigating Clara's emotional landmines. The gas station job, previously my second shift in purgatory, became almost meditative. Something about the routine of helping customers, restocking shelves, and handling simple transactions felt peaceful when you weren't constantly analyzing every interaction to make sure you weren't providing Clara with fresh ammunition for her next character assassination session. Even the weekend handyman work transformed from desperate income supplementation into something approaching enjoyment. When Mrs. Patterson asked me to fix her kitchen cabinet doors, I found myself actually looking forward to the project instead of just calculating how much Clara would spend of my earnings before I even got home. "You seem different lately, Marcus," Mrs. Patterson told me while I was adjusting her hinges. "More relaxed, I guess. Less like you're carrying the weight of the world." I almost laughed at her observation. "Just made some changes in my personal life," I said, which was the understatement of the century. Leo started showing up regularly with dinner, usually around the time I got home from whatever combination of jobs I'd worked that day. These weren't pity visits or welfare checks. They were just two friends hanging out like we used to before Clara had made it clear that my friendships were another inconvenience in her carefully managed life. "Remember when we used to just watch football and drink beer without you checking your phone every 5 minutes to see if Clara needed something?" Leo asked one evening, settling onto my new couch with a pizza and a six-pack. I did remember, actually. I remembered when friendship didn't feel like stealing time from a more important master, when I could laugh at Leo's ridiculous stories without calculating whether Clara would disapprove of me enjoying myself without her. Rachel's visits became the highlight of my week. She'd show up with groceries, help me organize my new space, and fill my apartment with the kind of laughter that Clara had always claimed was too loud or inappropriate for evening hours. Having my sister back in my life without having to filter every conversation through Clara's approval process felt like recovering from a long illness. "I have my brother back," Rachel told me one Sunday afternoon while we were hanging pictures on my bedroom wall. "I didn't realize how much I'd missed you until you started being yourself again." The legal battle was brutal, sure, but Andrew Morrison handled most of the heavy lifting while I focused on rebuilding the life Clara had spent 3 years systematically dismantling. Every court filing, every deposition, every piece of evidence we submitted felt like another brick removed from the wall that had been crushing me. Clara's messages escalated through every stage of grief, sometimes cycling through all 5 in a single text conversation. Denial. "This is obviously just a phase." Anger. "How dare you embarrass me like this?" Bargaining. "We can go to counseling." Depression. "You're ruining both our lives." Acceptance. "Well, we were still waiting on that one." But the most beautiful part of my new life was the silence between her messages. Hours would pass, sometimes entire days, where I didn't hear from Clara at all, and instead of being filled with anxiety about what fresh hell she was planning, I felt nothing but peaceful gratitude for the absence of her voice in my head. 1 month into my new life, I was cooking dinner in my quiet kitchen. Actual cooking, not just heating up whatever would minimize Clara's criticism, when my phone buzzed with another text from her. Instead of the usual spike of adrenaline and dread, I felt nothing more than mild curiosity about what stage of grief she'd reached this time. "I made a mistake. Can we talk?" I looked at the message for exactly 3 seconds, then deleted it and returned to my pan. The truth was clear. The night with the groceries, when I'd carried every bag alone up those stairs to face her cruelty, was the night I'd finally started carrying myself towards something better. And I'd never been happier to be wrong about rock bottom. If you've never experienced the judicial system's version of a cage match, let me paint you a picture. Imagine a boxing ring where one fighter thinks they're competing in a dance competition while the other comes loaded with brass knuckles and a detailed game plan. Clara walked into that courtroom like she was auditioning for a starring role in Poor Little Rich Wife, the victim's story, while I showed up with enough documentation to sink the Titanic and a lawyer who treated divorce proceedings like a blood sport he was born to win. The first few weeks after Clara received my farewell presentation had been a masterclass in psychological warfare conducted entirely through text messages and voicemails that escalated from confused to furious to desperately manipulative. She'd cycled through every manipulation technique in the narcissist's playbook. Guilt trips about throwing away our marriage, threats about making me pay for embarrassing her, and finally, the classic move of painting herself as the victim of my sudden and cruel abandonment. What Clara hadn't counted on was Andrew Morrison, my lawyer, who had the personality of a shark who'd gone to law school specifically to devour people like my soon-to-be ex-wife. During our initial consultation, Andrew had listened to my story with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for surgeons planning complex operations. "Your wife made several critical errors," he'd told me, spreading Clara's financial crimes across his conference table like evidence at a murder trial. "First, She committed fraud by opening credit accounts in your name without your knowledge. Second, she's been financially abusing you for years while contributing nothing to the household income. Third, and this is the big one, she documented her own emotional abuse through text messages and social media posts. Apparently, Clara's habit of posting about her life on social media had created a digital trail of evidence that would make prosecutors weep with joy. Screenshots of her complaining about having to train her husband, photos of expensive purchases made while I was working double shifts, and status updates about how some people didn't appreciate what they had, all time-stamped and preserved forever in the digital hall of self-incrimination. The real fun started when Clara hired her own attorney, some guy named Richard Steinberg who looked like he'd stepped out of a 1980s cologne advertisement and had the legal skills to match. Steinberg's strategy seemed to be based on the revolutionary concept that if you talked loudly enough and used enough big words, people might not notice that your client was basically a financial parasite who'd been bleeding her husband dry for 3 years. Clara's demands were spectacular in their audacity. She wanted spousal support, $3,000 a month for 5 years because she'd sacrificed her career potential to support my work. Never mind that her career, before we got married, had consisted of a part-time job at a boutique where she'd spent more on employee discounts than she'd earned in salary. She wanted half of all our assets, despite the fact that her only contribution to our wealth had been spending it faster than I could earn it. And in a move that would have impressed Satan himself for its sheer ballsiness, she wanted me to take responsibility for